This video is going to sound like I really dislike Claude Code, and I do, but honestly, even if all it can do is rewrite existing software but worse and in Rust, then there is no doubt that it will replace most modern developers. Over the course of 2 weeks, a team of Claude Code agents built a C compiler from scratch. Let's get one thing out of the way first. Of course it can compile Hello World. This controversial issue is just 100% user error. If I do exactly what the README says, using Linux and compiling the program with Cargo, I can run the exact command that's prescribed, and you can clearly see that it doesn't work. Well, that's not fair. It's not actually an issue with the compiler. The standard library should just be available. Take rec for example, another C compiler written in Rust with no dependencies. It was made by a solo dev in his spare time, and when I follow the same process, it will obviously run into the same issue that Claude did. Yeah, okay, it works completely fine, but that's not fair. How is Claude supposed to know where the standard library is? It's only been in the same spot for 20 years. Anyway, this is kind of embarrassing for Claude. But it's a reasonable mistake, and not a good enough reason to throw away the whole compiler. Once the dependencies are set up correctly, it can genuinely compile Hello World, and the Linux kernel, which is by no means an easy feat, and something that rec is unable to do. I found this guide showing you how to compile the Linux kernel. I'm using the version of Linux that Claude Code used, and according to this text file in the repo, I can run the same commands but change the C compiler by setting the cc and host cc variables. The first make to create the config works correctly, but the main make, the one that I assume builds the kernel, returns an error from ccc that says MOV requires 2 operands. Got 1. And look, I'm not some kind of assembly genius, but to me, it sounds like the compiler couldn't even create correct syntax for assembly, which is impressive, because assembly probably has the simplest syntax of any language. It's just a keyword followed by 1 or 2 variables, but it somehow managed to get that wrong. I'll be honest though, I'm not familiar with building Linux from source, so I'm willing to admit that I may have done something wrong. But come to think of it, I haven't seen a single person use this to compile the Linux kernel and then use that to actually run Linux. I ran into an assembly issue, this guy ran into a linking issue and gave up, and this other person testing the compiler didn't even use it with the Linux kernel. When the guy recreated code from scratch, it took 2 days for someone to reproduce the same recipe in their backyard. But I still haven't seen anyone use this public GitHub repository to do the exact thing that it's marketed as doing. Are we really just going to believe these claims when the example in the README doesn't even work for most modern Linux distros? If there is an example of someone doing this, please let me know, because I would love to see it. Okay, so I had another look while editing, and I did find someone who managed to compile and run Linux, but that's using RISC-V and a VM. So I don't know if it's an x86 issue. If it is, maybe they just shouldn't put that in the repo description. I might still be missing something, and it is possible to compile it on x86. So if there is, I'll just leave that in the pinned comment. But for now, let's assume that hypothetically, it does compile the Linux kernel as advertised. This whole compiler is still completely useless. This is the perfect project for an LLM to tackle. It's impressive and somewhat novel, but it's very well documented, with many examples across different languages in the training set. Saying that this compiler only cost $20,000 to make is disingenuous in my opinion, since it's not factoring in the thousands of hours that were spent writing tests that happen to be useful for this exact use case. Tests that other projects simply won't have. Claude got to use many existing test suites for GCC and for C programs like SQLite and Postgres, all for free. Tests that you would have to spend time writing if you were actually creating a new project, with additional tests that the researchers had to write when it still kept getting stuck. And when that didn't work, they just gave up and let it see what GCC does so that it could copy that. And even then, it's barely functional. I cannot believe that Anthropic published this blog post, especially with all the details of how this just did not work at all. This is not a usable compiler, and even when it does compile, it's mind-numbingly slow. I mentioned Harshanu's blog post before. He took some time to benchmark SQLite when compiled with GCC and with Claude C compiler. It managed to compile SQLite because SQLite is one of the simplest C projects to compile ever created. Simple queries are up to 7 times slower, but the real banger is this nested subquery that takes 47/100th of a second in GCC, but over 2 hours with Claude's compiler. That's a 158,129 times increase. I'm cherry picking the worst offender, but come on, how is that even possible? And sometimes the joins also just don't work. So not sure about that one. And good luck fixing that, because the codebase is now at a point where Claude cannot make new changes without breaking existing functionality. Anthropic has written, in plain words, what our future will look like if we go down this path, and some still treat this as a massive success. There is no reason to use this project. It provides no benefit over the existing compiler, and I think this is the perfect representation of what LLM coding feels like. It's expensive, confusing, and at the end, you're left with something that's somehow even worse than when you started. And even with every single advantage it had, this project still serves no purpose. In fact, I'm going to create an even better Claude compiler, named BCC, and it's going to take 2 minutes instead of 2 weeks. I'm using Codex because that's what I've been given a license for, but they're all the same. My compiler is just a simple bash script. I write a prompt that tells the LLM to guess what the project is based off the source file names, generate C files, and then compile it using GCC. This compiler successfully compiles Hello World with no issues first try. And if you just believe me without trying it yourself, it also compiles the Linux kernel. In record time, I might add, meaning this compiler is better or at least equivalent to Claude's original C compiler. But none of this even matters. LLMs will still become ubiquitous. As developers, we have shown an unnerving determination to make the wrong choice at every conceivable opportunity. We did it with JavaScript in the browser, we did it with cloud computing, we did it with frameworks, and it will be the same story with LLMs. The initial velocity increase and marketing hype is enough for people to convince themselves that this is a good decision, despite the clear evidence that these short-term benefits are far outweighed by the long-term trade-off. The majority of developers will spend most of their time vibe coding, but the whole system will not collapse. It will just get worse. There will be more bugs and more security vulnerabilities, and everything will break. And users will just live with it, and it will become the new normal. I actually predict programming jobs will go up, since our industry has a history of creating terrible practices and then compensating by hiring magnitudes more developers. You'd be forgiven for forgetting that the mythical Man Month was released in 1975, more than 50 years ago. And it's sad to be a programmer in a world where everything we do is a broken mess and nobody cares. But just when I was about to give up all hope, the man, the myth, the legend, the Sean Barrett has decided to start streaming again. This guy was writing C code in Visual Studio 6 before I was born, and you can bet that he's writing C code in Visual Studio 6 today. And that's what I love about software. Everything always changes. Tools and technologies come and go. But at the end of the day, it all compiles to the same assembly and runs on the same CPU. Well, it doesn't always compile to the same assembly. You should just use GCC. Thank you for watching. And I'm supposed to say that you have to smash the subscribe button. I don't know what that means. Gotta smash it. Smash the button. Smash the subscribe button. Smash!